Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of LitFestX with Saurav Jha. Saurav studied at Presidency College, Kolkata. He majored in economics and at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He writes and researches on global energy issues and clean energy development in Asia. His first book was called The Upside Down Book of Nuclear Power and was published 5 years ago. He also works as an independent consultant in the energy sector in India. His latest book, The Heat and Dust Project, also, of course, talks about, in many ways, the nexus, if you will, between energy, food, and water. And today we have with him to discuss with us, really the connection between energy, food, and water, and how India should be able to manage this nexus to become probably one of the world's first sustainable superpowers. Saurabh, welcome to LitFestX.
Thank you, Kumar. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Saurabh, when you wrote the Heat and Dust project, what was the core sort of issue or idea, that was bothering you and which you were out to sort of explore?
Well, the the Heat and Dust project was actually written by Devapriya Roy and me. It's been co-authored with Devapriya Roy.
Right.
It chronicles our budget travels across India. We traveled around on only 500 rupees a day for bed and board. But that book is about India. It's about the searching of youth. The two of us were not happy with our sort of yuppie lives in Delhi. That is when we left it all and we started traveling like that. Of course, we did have the book in mind already. But what the Heat and Dust project did was it brought to the forefront of my mind the very real need to understand the connections between various resource sectors. Although that book is about travel through India and how we saw India at that time, but it definitely, all that all the journeying through India, it sort of, I could internalize this new idea, which is at the core of all industrial era development, industrial urbanization. And that is this nexus between energy, food, and water. I'll give a small example to illustrate. Every time you drive your car, which is run on petrol or some other hydrocarbon, you infinitesimally increase the cost of your food. Because the energy input that goes into allowing your, fueling your transport, that is the same input which goes into also making fertilizers and a host of other agricultural processes, right? So what you end up doing is ever so slightly, as you increase demand over here, you would also increase the price of that input in agriculture. And that is going to get reflected in agriculture. See, we keep talking about fertilizer subsidies and the need to cut them down, but that's easier said than done. That's linked to the price of oil. And naturally to the price of gas, and gas and oil prices are still linked to each other. So so this is just one example. There are other examples too. Take for instance power plants in the United States. For instance, 55% of freshwater withdrawals are actually done by the electricity generating sector right now. In India, 86% freshwater withdrawals are by agriculture still. So if you want to industrialize, say, your various river basins, you have to understand that there is a trade-off involved in terms of water use. When we talk about land, one thing that was very clear, traveling across India, when you talk about land, you're actually talking about land with water. You're talking about land with groundwater, land that is along various river basins near oases and everything, because whether it be industry, whether it be agriculture, whether it be services, they basically are situated near the river basins. They are situated on the river basins. Otherwise, the costs are prohibitively high. You see, you can build, the people don't understand this mostly. You can build something in the middle of a desert, but the cost of getting water over there will be very, very high. It's only countries in the Gulf which did it anyway, because they were, they are all resource exporters, hydrocarbon exporters, and they were using that to distill seawater and then pipe it inside. But even they are finding it difficult, which is why they want to move to nuclear and all to safeguard whatever hydrocarbons they have to sell on the international market. So that's the point. My point is that we will get hemmed in our growth process unless we understand the linkages between various resource sectors.
Of course, sort of very sort of thematically very true, and given the heightened understanding about climate change, given the heightened understanding about being eco-sensitive, both for individuals and for governments and businesses. Where do you think the major global economies have been going wrong?
See, it's not something they could have actually managed, because the way technology unfolded, when we moved from agrarian societies to neo-industrialized or industrializing societies, it involves a huge shift in terms of the energy grades we use. We have managed to grow this particular kind of economic system using hydrocarbons, and that hydrocarbons are naturally they're carbon intensive by definition. So all our growth, all our material prosperity has been carbon led growth. Now what that did was, what people didn't realize, because you see, you have to understand that this whole industrialized growth worldwide is a very recent phenomena in terms of history. It's not a very new, it's not a very old thing. So there are a lot of ramifications that are coming up now that were not understood earlier, or even now are not that well understood. So it has been carbon intensive growth. Everything that we have done, we have built using high amounts of energy and water. You see, what are you doing when you're using a fertilizer? You're basically giving concentrated energy to increase your yield per hectare. When you talk about a higher standard of living, you tend to look at per capita GDP, but what you should also look at is the amount of energy being consumed per person. In India, the per capita availability of energy is only 1,000 kilowatt hour at the moment per person. In the West, it is 5,000 on an average. So, you can understand, if you want to get to that kind of material setup, it will involve a huge increase in the use of energy. So that is where, see, the model that has been set in the West is a model which is not even sustainable for them now, even though they actually ruled over the world for a large part while they were growing. That same model, if used by others in a G0 world where many are simultaneously trying to grow, is going to fail even quicker. That is where the nexus is important, because the nexus has a direct link with global warming. The nexus has got reinforced because of the use of hydrocarbons, and the use of hydrocarbons are still the main reason for global warming, along with, of course, population growth. But then population growth, which is leading to the greater use of hydrocarbons, you see. So that is the way. So moving out of that old paradigm will require us to understand the very nature of industrialization and urbanization.
Right. I mean, clearly a lot of it is about the demographics then. And, there's been if you remember, there's been a lot of discussion globally about how China's economic boom and massive population will further lead to consumption of hydrocarbons and, lead to global warming. And certainly, I think that's something that India will also have to face. Where do you see this discourse going? I mean, given the fact that the entire, Western developed economies obviously saw their share of rising income, rising consumption, and better lifestyles based on this, usage of hydrocarbons. And now countries like India and China, which are going to be on the growth curve, will obviously have to either follow the same practices that were followed by the West, or have to come out with newer path-breaking practices, which will ensure that changes in lifestyle are met without harming the environment. But where is that discourse going entirely?
See, most of the discourse is currently focused on energy at the moment. India is already the third largest emitter in absolute terms, and China is, of course, it depends on how you calculate it, but China is almost the largest now. And the basic point is this: we are still very low as far as being a per capita emitter is concerned, and that goes into the heart of the matter, right? That our emissions will just explode as we we start becoming more materially prosperous. So how do we get around it? Getting around it, people just tend to think that all you need to do is increase the penetration of your energy system and that will take care of everything. That will somehow lead to decarbonization. But life is not so simple. The carbon footprint is far more elaborate than just that. The other problem is something like intermittent renewables, even with energy storage, which is still not at the level where you can store really a huge amount of power. You can do it for decentralized purposes, but the most effective form of grid storage still continues to be a reservoir, a hydro reservoir, a pump storage plant. The point is we have to move to a new energy grade, which is at the same time not going to lead to higher emissions. That new energy grade, for the purposes of large amounts of power being delivered at any time for industrialization, can only be nuclear. Or if you can, and in the intermediate span, if you can achieve sequestration technologies for carbon capture and make them cheap enough. So that will allow you to transition. Solar and wind naturally have a role to play. There's no denying that. They have a major role to play. But their role is better explored in decentralized generation, because we must not forget, when you look at the energy, food, water nexus, then all the new technologies, whether it be nuclear or whether it be solar or whether it be wind, they seem less attractive than before. Nuclear uses a lot of water. So you have to move to, HVAC systems, the air-cooled plants. Solar uses a lot of land, because it is, after all, a waveform of energy. You require 8 acres of land per megawatt of solar, and that will not even give you, the equivalent of 1 megawatt. What a 1 megawatt capacity would generate if it generated all the time. It will be more like a quarter of that, or even 20% of that. So given our sheer needs, we will have to plan our energy system very carefully. And actually, nuclear and renewables will play a role in that. But we'll have to understand the dynamics of land, water, and of course emissions to decide what our mix will be. On the agricultural side, we have to reduce the use of chemical inputs. We have to look at other forms of supplying the energy that is required to increase yields. Reduce water use in agriculture. Industrial process, the same thing. We have to look at new forms of lean manufacturing and what is being called sustainable manufacturing. So we have a lot of directed technical change to undergo, and that won't happen if we are if we just remain mere recipients of technology. We have to invest now in the technologies that can break the nexus if we want to grow in a world which is a world where everybody is fighting for the same space, which is what is happening now. So that is what we have to understand, that the answer, unfortunately, lies not just in behavior but in technology. Technology will play a very key role. Behavior is important. We'll have to increase practices which are more efficient, which are sustainable. We'll have to educate people. All that is true, but that will simply not take care of our very real requirements. That is the point I want to make.
Right. So and tell us a little bit more about the role that this nexus between energy, food, and water, and maybe even land has played in, which has led to the continued diminishing strength of some or all of them.
See, absolutely. See, the thing is that it's energy, food, and water are the basic requirements. It's only when you impute the costs associated with them that you have money left to purchase anything. They play directly into purchasing power, and they play a disposable income for purchasing things after these are met, and to savings also. What typically happens is, as the process of industrial development or industrial urbanization begins, you use surplus labor from farmlands for your industrial process. Labor is cheap at that time, but you need to be your agricultural productivity needs to be high so that you can transport enough food to feed those laborers. But over time, what happens is, and usually green fields are taken to build a new plant. Over time, what happens is, for n number of reasons, the plant doesn't remain sustainable anymore, the factory, the value creation center. But what takes its place is never a new factory. It is usually real estate. So when you have an urban conurbation developing around a factory, as has happened throughout the world, including in our country, people don't realize that particular value creating sector is no longer going to be there. So then you try to reinvent yourself over there. All kinds of new services are reinvented that are suitable, created that are suitable for an urban scape, as long as there is sufficient purchasing power. But as you go along industrializing your entire river basin and slowly become post-industrial, you find that the value creating sector has vanished from your economy. Services can't stand on their own. You see, services, you need to add something, add value to something to service it subsequently. You need manufacturing. So what the Western economies did was they got rid of all the more polluting items down the chain and moved up the value chain in terms of manufacturing and send those abroad. And whatever jobs were being created were basically being created via imports. See, imports also create jobs. When an Audi comes into your country, it sets up a particular value chain. But unfortunately, the amount of value added in that chain can never be as high as the person who holds the royalty for the Audi. You see, that is the problem. This is why growth starts faltering, and and growth of one sector increases naturally, the one who owns the IP to the car, but employment diminishes in the said home country. So demand slowly diminishes. If demand diminishes, then ultimately you'll find that investment will also taper off in those economies.
Right.
And that happens because you are moved to an urbanized scape where costs are increasing all the time.
Like we spoke about, the huge growth that India and maybe countries like China and a few other emerging economies, which also have large populations, are yet to see, which will clearly lead to a rise in their net emissions. So where do you see the entire development of new technology or new, ways of making sure that the nexus between energy, food, and water doesn't become, a burden? Rather, we can use that nexus to the advantage of the economy as well as to the consuming population.
See, we have to work on two fronts. One is we naturally need to property in India, an intellectual property that is directed towards sustainability in terms of the nexus between energy, food, and water, which will also take care of greenhouse gas emissions. So that would itself generate employment, new areas of business. Ultimately specialization, it's specialization which drives the economy in some ways. But at the same time, we need to re-examine urbanization itself. In my opinion, there is a certain amount of urbanization that every river basin can take. If we push for that same old model of cities, we have to understand what cities are going to be like. First of all, cities will have to have a lot of diversity. And I don't mean only demographic diversity, I mean in terms of diversity of employment. A single value city, something like Detroit, is a no-no. That's like sealing your fate immediately. The other thing is, how many cities do you want? You should not be promoting this idea of urban high living just for the sake of it. But you could reinvent. You have to reinvent, in fact, the countryside, because we must not forget that our per capita resources, while we may be able to import food or energy from other places, our overall per capita water and land resources and land which can be lived upon is not high. It is nothing compared to the United States. So we cannot simply tell ourselves that 80% of our population will also live in cities tomorrow. That will not be the right way to go. We will just be making a very high fixed cost system which won't be able to pay for it. See, when you urbanize, you need urban services, you need utilities, you need new infrastructure. All of those things ride on the fact that your population is being able to create new value that you may be able to tax away to pay for them. In the future, you may not be able to pay for them. And then you will face a double whammy of increasing debt and decreasing unemployment, which has happened in the European economies. So we have to move away from that. We have to reinvent the village with new technologies. And we have to, obviously a village will never have the diversified setup or the densities that you associate with the city and all the economies of scale that come with that, but they have their own advantages. They can keep costs much lower. And we need to really change our mindset vis-a-vis agriculture. Agriculture need not only be, growing rice or wheat. There are a huge number of things that you can grow, which require less energy and less water. There are a huge number of other services that can flow out of agriculture, which can be there in the countryside. Yeah.
Saurabh, clearly, what you're painting is probably a viable alternative way of development. But the fact that we anyways as a country in India, we anyways are capital starved for the routine infrastructure and development projects. From what you're saying there, one really would need to strike a balance between allocation of capital to newer technologies and newer ways of development vis-a-vis existing projects which both government and private sector are in many ways already committed to. So purely from a practical and implementation perspective, in the short term, what do you think can be done to ensure that we have a more quality, a higher quality and more sustainable growth?
See, Kumar, we have to increase our savings rate. You see, foreign capital for any of the East Asian economies, whatever their model may have been, was only a complement or a supplement rather. They had historically high savings rate. We've had, our return to capital is very high in India at the moment, obviously because we haven't built ourselves up that much, and we have historically actually been more efficient at using capital than say China. Our incremental capital output ratio has always been lower than theirs, but we don't have high savings in our economy at the moment. China at one point has reached over almost 50% of GDP as savings. We are now between 20 and 30. We have to increase the level of savings in our economy, and for that attention has to be given to agriculture right now. In rural India, in amongst landless laborers, 53% of the total income is still going towards food. So we have a problem of food prices for a certain section of the population. We have to increase household savings in India. For that, we need to focus on energy, food, and water. And on the reform side, we have to make our financial intermediation system far more efficient. For that, what the process will be is, of course, naturally beyond the scope of this discussion. But that, along with the leveraging, by leveraging, if digital India can be done properly, the way to leverage it would be to provide purchasing power and to draw out savings, if possible. That would be should be the real aim of digital India. The savings rate of India can be increased in a 5-year time span, in my opinion. But there has to be a focus on these things that will free up the capital that we require.
And you mentioned about the introduction of a new metric in defining a superpower nation, right? So we are now saying that a superpower basically also needs to be a sustainable superpower. And how do you think that India can achieve that?
Well, if India focuses on breaking this nexus whereby you don't have a cascade in the increase in the price of inputs, but if you look at it over a period of 30 years, each has been reinforcing the other. If it breaks this, it'll become more it'll be able to sustain growth for much longer while improving the quality of growth. It'll be growth that will be a lot cleaner. It'll be growth that will be less energy intensive. It'll be growth which will also generate more employment. See, we are faced with a very peculiar situation today. Since we are a late industrializer and a late industrializing nation, we are a country which is facing the triple whammy actually of international markets having turned protectionist. So we will not have that scale available to us. We are people who are faced with a situation where the technologies that have come in were developed in countries which had a different resource base or had a different resource footprint altogether. Thirdly, the third triple whammy that we have is we are having to do it much faster because the job intensity of growth has gone down. If you look at historical growth rates in the West, it would be laughable compared to the metrics we use now. Today, 6% growth is not acceptable anymore. That is considered the new Hindu growth rate. Or maybe 7%. People are talking about 9%, 10%. So why do we need such this kind of explosive growth anyway? That is because the employment intensity of growth has gone down. So we have to understand how we are going to go about this process. Merely urbanizing in a rapid way and then transferring rural populations to urban areas may lead to a collapse of employment in our economy. Because see, ultimately a person aspires to go to an urban center because he thinks he'll get a better life and a higher income. That is the real reason. But for that, you need to generate the pie. You just can't build some houses and think that suddenly you will have employment generated through services. You will only generate employment in as much as the construction period, which is what happened to China post 2008. To keep their growth rate sustained, they started building ghost cities, but they haven't been able to rebalance their economy.
Right.
So that is my point there.
Right. Some very valid points there, Saurav. We are getting a few questions on Twitter from live viewers. I'll probably take in one or two of them. So, okay, here's one coming up on your screen now. So this is by Vanshika, and it says, is the world drying, eating, and ending its resources due to inefficient or unplanned strategy?
That's actually a very pertinent question. Let's go to the strategy. In terms of strategy, efficient systems are not necessarily sustainable systems. That is the funny part. An efficient complex system, a complex system may be very efficient, but it may not be able to endure. And that goes into the heart of strategy. The thing is, we may never run out of oil. We may never run out of water. We may never run out of clean air either. But will we be able to afford any of them simultaneously and then have enough left over to buy anything else? You see, when you buy something, you're sustaining somebody else's job, right? And if you can't buy that, then what are you going to sustain? We are going to see economic meltdown much quicker than we are going to see the running out of resources.
Right, right. The next question is from Brigupati, and he says, what must be the areas of focus for technical development and change to manage the Nexus?
Well, I think I already enumerated that, but again, we should focus on power plants that require much less water, that require less land. On the food side of things, we should be able to move away from using hydrocarbon based inputs for increasing productivity. We have to look at other ways. We have the Prime Minister talking about more crop per drop. That is exactly right. We do need more crop per drop, or rather we need less drop altogether. We need, even if you have to sustain, say, rice, we may not need to cultivate more rice actually. We also need to change our production basket. In the western states of India, they used to cultivate very sustainable grains such as jowar, bajra, ragi, etc. But because of cultural reasons, people came to look down upon those. Now, of course, there's a movement which says that those have a lot of health benefits, and now some people are opting for those. But the fact is that we should not be promoting rice and wheat consumption just for the sake of it. Again, the other question, the big gorilla in the room, our consumption of various kinds of meat. Forget the religious debate. The really relevant debate is the amount of water and energy that processing certain kinds of meats require. In a world of 8 billion, they are not sustainable. Also, exporting them from here is even more stupid because you are exporting huge amounts of your fresh water to another country. Food is mostly water at the end of the day. So on the technical side of things, we need to increase productivity in agriculture. We need to reduce its footprint, its resource footprint. That will have an impact. In terms of mechanization, we have to be clear about how much we'll mechanize. We just can't suddenly increase the carbon footprint of agriculture. And in terms of our industrial ecosystem, we have to look at new lean manufacturing concepts, more sustainable factories which are flexible, which can last much longer.
Right. Saurav, this brings us to the end of this very informative and I must say thought-provoking session. Clearly, there's a lot that the world and India and us as citizens need to do to ensure that the sustainability of our own lifestyle is longer, and we don't hamper our future generations' quality of life and living because of the actions we take. In our own way, I think I can say that we have contributed a little by making this virtual LitFest, a very, very low carbon footprint literary festival in the world. So we are hosting about 100 authors, and a large number of them are from abroad, from 9 or 10 different countries. Most of the ones from India also are from several cities, and without flying anyone on an airplane or doing any of that sort of like you mentioned, high emitting activities. So we are doing our bit, and look forward to seeing some great work from you going forward as well. More power to your research and power to your pen when you're talking about energy, food, water, and land. And certainly you've given us and all our viewers a new lens to look at everyday life and everyday activity, and what is going on between food, water, energy, and land. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kumar. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for that.